know of any information, but it's possible that it exists. And what I do know is that workers near fracking sites, like wells, I mean, it's really quite a different scenario, but some workers have been killed from the gas releases there. Yeah.
They did state at Range that there was going to be at least 6 people there full time.
Oh.
They kept saying that over and over again, that it's not going to be automated, it'll be automated at night, and they couldn't give us any, that's why I'm is that we're going to have a crew there full time during the day.
Okay, I'll just repeat that so that it's in the recording in everyone hears. I was corrected, and what Kinder Morgan apparently said at Lynch recently is that there would be 6 full-time employees during the day, and it would only be automated at night.
Hi, I'd just like to ask you, the pollution that you talked about in emissions, does it end up on the ground in water supplies? And what kind of worries do we have about that? Because we don't have, well, we have private wells. We don't have clean water except in Greenville. But there are reservoirs right down the road. Right now.
I'm just going to repeat it because I don't know if the mic got switched off or it was just a distance problem.
I don't know.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Do you want to repeat it? I'm not sure to have your voice on.
Okay. I wanted to ask about the emission effect on wells and reservoirs, aquifers. We are all on private wells, at least in New Ipswich. Temple, I believe, has private wells. Greenville has a reservoir. I can't tell you how far down the road, Henry.
About 0.6 miles.
0.6 miles from here. Do you have any knowledge of what those emissions do to the water supplies?
I can make several points. It's something that I've become very interested in the last few weeks, but I haven't had a lot of time to research as I prepare for this. First of all, somebody in Northfield made a very good point that if they were to build a pipeline, they would have to blast through bedrock. And that blasting would not only create a channel for the pipeline, but it would also create fissures in the bedrock. And the pipe doesn't get just laid down on the bare rock. There's fill rock, this little pea rock that gets laid down at the bottom, and then you put the pipeline on top, and then you cover it with dirt. So really what happens from that process, this was like an ecology scientist was saying that there's a good chance that building a pipeline would create a new artificial waterway to transport water through the region. And the problem is, if the pipeline is leaking, if something gets into that channel, then it is potentially a way to transport pollutants underground, potentially connecting with the water supply. So I think that's an important point that nobody's done very much to address. The other thing is, part of my evaluations of this power plant in Rhode Island, I came across some Rhode Island regulations which say that for a new major source of pollution like this power plant, you have to do an analysis that not only looks at the pollution in the air, but how the pollution from the air gets absorbed into the soil. And then I looked into that in detail, and what they had were formulas from the EPA going back into the 80s that describe or provide estimates of the rate at which pollution travels from the air and gets absorbed into the soil. And in fact, we absorb a lot of chemicals that way because of dust and just picking things up through contacting our mouth. So according to what I was reading from Rhode Island documents, that's actually a significant means whereby pollution enters our bodies. So anything going on in the air will get absorbed into the soil, and obviously from there it can get washed out into the water. And I would expect that something similar happens with open bodies of water as well. Or if you have a private well, the pollutants get absorbed by the soil and eventually work their way down to the water table. So then I went back and I looked at, because the environmental report has these different sections. Resource report 7 has to do with soil. I looked at there, nothing, these were pure cataloging the quality of the soils. And there was no mention of this fact that at one time the EPA said, well, there's a rate at which air pollution travels from the air into the soil, and that has to be taken into account when you evaluate the effects on human health. And I can only guess at this point it's because that was their requirement in another state for a major source. And this, they managed to avoid calling this a major source. Right? So that's, my best guess is they don't have to worry about it.
There's a farmer here. How far away are you now from the compressor station? Yeah. 200 yards or so from the compressor station. Is there anything that says at what point he runs beef cattle there? That those beef cattle aren't saleable? They aren't fit for human consumption? There's sort of in pollution going into them?
No, I think it's hard to even get Kinder Morgan to admit that they release toxic pollution. You know, and to say nothing of the fact that their compressor station has an effect on human health. To take the step and say that the air pollution has an effect on soil, on water, on agriculture and livestock, it's just so far beyond the radar at this point that I'm not sure anyone knows. Although, you know, I think you've probably heard stories of livestock dying in Pennsylvania due to fracking sites. So it's not that I don't think there's an issue there, but other people have brought up, what about organic farms that are near compressor stations? I don't know organic farming regulations, but my guess is they say nothing about compressor stations, even though they may be relevant.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if you're willing to go here, but I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share your impression of our governor's response to meeting with you. I don't know if you can articulate.
Yep, I can share some public comments. And what I would share is that the governor expressed her appreciation for my coming to visit as part of the meeting and acknowledged the importance of the issue of human health. A majority of the meeting was spent discussing the electricity generation needs of the state and how fracked gas might be one way to supply power to the state, to provide heating, and whether heating our homes with fracked gas might be safer for human health than something like burning wood or burning oil. And so what I'll say publicly is that, you know, there seemed to be some acknowledgement, but we really didn't spend a lot of time talking about health, and at least in the sense of a compressor station. And that's part of why I put up this last couple of slides, is because I think we were missing some important points, that these really, both on a local level, regional, state, national, international level, these are not projects that we should be investing in.
Thank you.
Hi, and thank you for coming. I wanted to ask you, you were talking about the hazardous waste from cleaning the pipeline. I read that the EPA has actually marked that as non-hazardous waste, and that the pipeline companies have used it to do things like make our roads safer in winter, and like a de-icing chemical of some sort. And animals, our pets, will go out and they'll walk in this, and they'll come in, they'll lick their paws, track it into your home, and the pets have died. So I didn't know maybe what we could do to get a grip on that, because the EPA also seems to think that's non-hazardous.
First of all, I would really love it if we could somehow pass off that information. I'd be very interested to see that. What I would like to see is the testing that was done. Without having seen it, I can't say much about it, but my expectation is, you know what, other than, I mean, the methane is not collecting as a solid material, right? The methane is a gas. It would not precipitate out into the toxic material. So there's some material in the pipeline, in the gas, that's precipitating. And other than the methane, you know, methane really doesn't have a lot of major effects on human health unless, I mean, we're getting unbelievably concentrated. So other than the methane, you know, and again, Kinder Morgan said, well, maybe about 97% of the gas is methane, and the other 2 or 3% was something else. And pretty much all that other stuff, other than water, is going to be toxic. And that sludge you're describing has some water in it, but that's not pure water, obviously. So the other point I would like to make is that your description of the PET going outside, coming back in, tracking material in, this is a well-established means whereby other pollutants like lead, which is quite toxic for children, it affects their intelligence and their development. You know, if you have lead in the soil in your garden and you track it in, you can increase the amount, children will end up with increased levels of lead. And it's the same for parents who work in toxic industries. They come home with things like coal dust or asbestos on their clothing, and their spouse ends up with cancer. So don't underestimate the importance of that happening. Right? So if that material really is toxic, which I expect it should be, it shouldn't be released anywhere in the environment. It needs to be processed as a hazardous waste facility.
It's been a long night. I think everybody has had a lot of good questions. Sure.
Sorry, I just saw one more person coming up. Did you bring and ask a question?
First of all, thank you very much for coming. It's been wonderful. I have a question about the 49.6 units of nitrogen dioxide that was derived by a survey funded by Kinder Morgan. I have two questions. If that number could be proved to be over 50, how would it affect the whole application? How much aggravation would it be for Kinder Morgan? And number two, is it possible that a private group, how much would it cost for a private group to fund that same study to find out how much nitrogen dioxide? Is that possible that it could be funded privately to find that answer?
Okay, let me start with your second question. And one of the funny things that Kinder Morgan had to put in their thousands and thousands of pages of documents are photocopies or scans of the checks they used to pay the consultants. This is part of like the state agency requirements. So you can look and see who were these consultants, how much were they paid. The check I remember seeing was like $2,300 or something, not like a massive amount of money. So, you know, if your budget, if that seemed reasonable for your budget, yeah, sure, you could hire somebody. But the thing is, you may or may not need proprietary information from Kinder Morgan. At this point, they might have released everything in this final application, all of the information you need to recreate that study. And what the implications would be, I don't think it would, in and of itself, stop the project. It would be a hassle if they had to do more paperwork. And so the table that references that 49 and 50, it says that if they had met the 50 tons per year threshold, they would need to meet additional requirements under Title V of the Clean Air Act. And I have to admit, I haven't gone back to the Clean Air Act to look at Title V and see what the implications are. It might mean they have to do some more analyses, it might mean they have to report more, but I don't think it would mean they have to reduce their emissions, and I don't think it would mean the project would be in jeopardy. So and the other thing is, you know, you have to go to a consulting group that does something other than work for these companies, all right? Because if this is all they do day in, day out, is work for Kinder Morgan or Spectra Energy, they're not going to come up with contrary material for you, is my guess. If they work for a lot of different agencies and have a wide variety of customers, then maybe they would give you an honest answer. So I would say keep thinking about it, look into Title V of the Clean Air Act, try and get, it's the first section of this resource report 9. There will be a table in there that says like the cutoffs in the 50s in there. So oh, okay, sure. Everybody seems to be staying, so we can do it.
This is more a comment than a question to your point about pollution, land pollution, from airborne pollution. And this is concerning our town reservoir in Greenville. Although the reservoir itself sits 0.6 miles roughly from the compressor station, the compressor station itself sits on elevated land, which drains roughly about a quarter of a mile, maybe even less, into streams which go into our reservoir. So the impact is even greater than what you would imagine just from being 0.6 miles from the reservoir. You know, the water draining into our reservoir is essentially right there, right next to this compressor.
All right, you imagine now that that is a construction site, okay? And you have thousands of trucks bringing in all of their equipment, laying all this pipeline, doing all of those industrial operations, and that's just to build this. And there are other pipeline applications where companies will estimate, okay, we're going to spill out this much out of these storage tanks that I referenced in the beginning. And that's just because you've got like a, I don't know, a 500 gallon tank of toxic material. Well, you know, you have to use hoses. Some of that stuff's going to end up spilling. And the one thing I would say is, again, as with the air, it would be important to document water quality before any construction happens. And if I'm remembering correctly, there are some towns in Massachusetts that are working to test individual wells before, like now, they're testing these wells right now so that they have some baseline data. If the thing gets built and you go back and you test it out, you're finding elevated levels of these pollutants.
Let's give a good hand for Dr. There's two groups you can contact if there's additional questions you have. There's either the New Ipswich Pipeline Resistance Group, contact them, or in Temple, the Temple Pipeline Advisory Commission. They both have public meetings. You can go there and we can get any additional questions to the doctor. There is a lot of literature over on the side tables. There is a pre-stamped card to Governor Cuomo if you would like to sign it and ask him to oppose the Constitution pipeline, which, if that was actually stopped, would greatly affect, if not completely kill, the NED Northeast Energy Direct pipeline. So pick up a card if you'd like to sign it. You can read it. It has to do with protecting fishing and waters in New York, but it will indirectly affect us. So thanks everybody for coming out, and good night.
Get famous. Like a selfie.
You don't get the phone. She's going over to check out the stuff. Do you want to check out the stuff too?